Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Jan Smits. I'm the chairman of the board of Naturalis, which is the Dutch Biodiversity Research Center, and is also a natural history museum. It's great to be here, and we have a fantastic session about how can Europe better unleash its enormous potential in the fields of science and innovation. Because let's not forget, with 7% of the world population, Europe still generated 25% of the world's knowledge. But we have often the feeling that we could do more, that we could better unleash all that knowledge. We're going to discuss that with a very esteemed panel, and I'm going to introduce them very quickly. Maria Leptin, the President of the European Research Council, may I invite you on stage. Christian Ehler, he is member of the European Parliament and for many years a driver of science and innovation through the European Parliament. He's now rapporteur for the next framework program and for the European Competitiveness Program. So he's the man of 400 billion euro, I calculated, Christian. Then we have Anne Medler, and is at the Center of Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, and recently joined the European Institute of Innovation. Congratulations, Anne, with this appointment. And then we have Sue Duke, who is the Managing Director of LinkedIn for, I think, Europe, the Middle East, Latin America. Do I forget any other continents? That's enough, all right. That's enough. That's more than enough. And Europe, an enormous powerhouse for science and innovation, and yet we do not punch above our weights. We could do much more. What is hampering us to unleash that enormous potential we have?
Yeah, thank you, and good morning. Great to be here. So it's exactly as you say. We are very good at science and innovation, so this is not the problem. Please trust me, I've been around a long time. But what has been the problem and continues to be is really that leadership in science and innovation doesn't really feed into the wider economy, and also not really into global leadership in these areas. So Europe has a real problem when it comes to sort of scaling some of these ideas and taking them out of the labs and into really an environment where they can commercialize and can build companies and penetrate global markets. So I've spent the last 6 years in my previous job trying to get European clean tech off the ground. Yeah, so because I worked at Breakthrough Energy, which was founded by Bill Gates. So this is really sort of cutting-edge, frontier-type technologies. And remember, this was during the Green Deal, and you really thought, okay, Europe's going to be a leader here. I always felt that clean tech would play to Europe's strength because it's about deep tech, it's about engineering, it's about science. So I was very confident that Europe was going to be a leader. And I have to tell you, it was a really sobering experience in clean tech. And for a variety of reasons. Number one is the regulatory framework really wasn't fit for purpose. The way Europe regulates emerging technologies is basically for perfection. But every technology is on a learning curve. It's not going to be perfect from day one. So if the ambition is to produce net zero, it will not be net zero from day one, right? So, and this is really what the United States and China do way better than Europe. So from our perspective, it's perfect on paper. But what good is that if it's not, it doesn't find application in the real economy? So I really believe we need to go into what I like to call the engine room of policy making and look at how we do these things. Secondly, I already alluded to it, there's a real problem with scale in Europe. So Europe has not produced a deep tech company that has a market cap above 100 billion euros and is listed in Europe for more than 50 years. That's a really, really poor track record. Really poor. But I have to say, because I've been doing this for close to 25 years, until recently, no one really cared about this. So the issue of competitiveness really has only come up in the last year and a half, 2 years. And I ask you, from a policy perspective and from Brussels, I mean, how do we believe that we're going to live among the highest standards in the world with an economy that is underperforming? And the only competitive advantage that Europe has, also as a resource-poor geography, it's our brains, it's the science, it's the innovation. I think we neglected that for a very long time. And my third and final point is there's really a problem with growth capital in Europe. So we've done a good job filling we make early stage innovation happen, including in startups. There are amazing startups in Europe. Where we really fall short is in growth capital. And that's really sad and frankly pathetic, because think about where a company is when it needs growth capital. It already has a business model. It already has customers. It already has a proven business model. Why are we not stepping in and supporting these companies? So what typically happens is that often they're acquired by US companies, or they sell prematurely, or they move elsewhere, basically, So this is just not smart from a public policy perspective. And I hope we can talk about this later, this is one of the things that the new Scale Up Europe Fund is supposed to address. And it's about time, because the lack of growth capital is a real problem, as well as really the lack of exits. We don't have a lot of exits in Europe. So in a nutshell, the problem in Europe is not in innovation and science, it's in commercialization and deployment and global penetration of the innovation and science that's produced in Europe.
Thank you very much. And we gradually move to the solutions, because I look at that angle, what will be done in order to indeed find solutions for the problems you just mentioned. Sue, your company LinkedIn is sitting on a goldmine of data with regard to AI, digitization, and you can compare a little bit Europe and the dynamics there through LinkedIn, of course, and all these data compared to other continents. Can you say a few words about it? What's the difference?
Yeah, great. Is this on?
It's on.
Yeah, it is on. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Yeah, that's right. I think Anne summarized it very, very well, that we see similarly when we look at LinkedIn, we have a global membership of 1.3 billion people on the platform all around the world. And a huge part of the work that we do is look at what is happening in real time and in real detail with jobs and skills in over 200 countries around the world. And we've also 70 million companies on the platform. So as you can imagine, we can see very clearly what's going on the demand and the supply side. And it just at this time of enormous change and acceleration of AI and other parts of the economy changing so quickly, it's really interesting to see how some of this manifests in the labour market. And you're absolutely right, Anne, that what we see is that very strong, the fundamentals are very, very strong at that basic research level, particularly concentrated in cities where you'd imagine where there's those strong research bases and those strong universities who are engaged in this. The challenge, I think, is particularly as we look at how is Europe going to take this next wave of innovation that's going to be driven by AI, both as a general purpose technology, which is a lot around where the conversation is, but also AI innovation as a method of innovation itself. How can Europe capitalize and take this new technology to get those innovation gains, get that competitiveness, get that growth, which, as you said, it's such a huge focus, I think, since the Draghi report, but politically very much so over the last couple of years. And there we have work to do, that's for sure. So yes, there is a very strong base when we look at AI technical skills, those AI engineering skills, those neural networks, the people who are training the models, building out the technology. There's a strong fundamental base, but what we see, so actually the concentration of AI skills is higher in Europe than in the US or the UK right now.
That's interesting.
But the others are growing faster.
Yeah.
Right? So we're very close to being overtaken what has been a strong historic base, but the others are catching up faster, that's for sure. And it's fragmented, right? So again, it's concentrated. So when we look at Germany, for example, Berlin, Munich, Hanover, you have those strong bases. In France, Paris, actually Grenoble comes out top in terms of the concentration of those skills. Paris, Toulouse, very, very strong. Countries like Estonia, coming through. We see that real growth, which again, I think historically, that's coming off an elevated base of digitization where there was a big push. So that's when we look at the indigenous talent. And then there's also this deep competition to get this talent into economies from outside as well. And there we typically see these countries being net importers of that talent. But what we do see is other countries like the UAE and India pulling ahead. Yeah. And I think one of the key unlocks of this is going to be those skills and that expertise, not just concentrated in particular areas, but that wider diffusion so that we can capitalize on the broader benefits that this technology can bring. And that is going to require, and again, you see a real focus on this. You saw it in the Draghi report. We see it in the AI Continental Action Plan, that one of the 5 pillars there is skills and has to be skills. If we don't have the talent and capability to unlock and distribute and scale and commercialize these innovations, this research, and this entrepreneurial spirit. We really see that, interestingly, coming through in Europe. Amongst young people, they really want to go out and set up their own business. They're really driven by purpose and values and a mission to make a contribution. The appetite is there. We need to capitalize on that by ensuring that workers have these skills, have this expertise and knowledge to be able to
So there's huge potential in Europe. It's just a matter now to unlock it, to unleash it. That brings me a little bit, of course, to the solutions, because the European Commission has put forward proposals in the field of skills, in the field of competitiveness, in the field of research. Christian and Maria, I turn now to you. What do you think of these proposals? First, Maria, what is your take on the proposal the European Commission has put forward now?
Well, of course, overall, we really welcome them. At a time when caution would have been easy, the Commission actually put forward a very bold multi-annual financial framework with real modernization. They dared to shift resources towards defense, industrial competitiveness, away from the more classic fields. And for research, Horizon Europe, they proposed to raise it to 175 billion, up from 95 billion today. Not quite double, but let's call it double, let's be generous. Also with frontier research as of the type that the ERC funds, almost doubling. So that's the ambition that we need. But what we're seeing is that that ambition is already under threat. The national governments and political groups and lobby interests are pushing back against the overall 2 trillion budget. Maybe not surprisingly, but I'm not sure they see the urgency, everyone sees the urgency of competitiveness and increased productivity through innovation. And that pushback, of course, fragments Europe's response. Remember, Draghi recently warned, not in his report, but in a recent talk where he was clearly getting desperate, he said that Europe must rediscover the unity of action. I'm wondering what he thinks about the Mercosur reaction. So without ambition, all this will be diluted into compromise. So I think we have a bit of a credibility gap. Europe speaks convincingly about sovereignty, productivity, global competition. But if this is watered down and funding is fragmented, then it will not translate into results. I think the current MFF is a real opportunity. And concession to yesterday's priorities will weaken our capacity to compete tomorrow. And I'm already dreading the tractors in Brussels who are going to be pushing back against this innovation, against this innovative MFF. What Europe needs is really a fertile environment that connects discovery with application. We've heard from you some of the challenges there. We need strong institutional support and an entrepreneurial mindset across universities and research centers. And the private investment market, we've also heard that in Europe, is still not strong enough for deep tech. There's a lack of credible lead investors who want to take the long-term challenge in Europe's innovation systems. So we have ideas, we have talent, we have scientific excellence. We certainly see that in our applications that we fund. But we can't afford this fragmentation, short-termism, hesitation. If we're serious about competitiveness, we must all align together with action. We need to protect scale in the EU budget and safeguard frontier research, and I think we'll be coming to that later, and restore the unity of action that we need now.
Absolutely, very clear. Christian, I introduce you as the man of 400 billion euro because there's going to be a lot of money available. Are you happy what the Commission has put now on the table, the proposals indeed in regard to skills, with regard to competitiveness, with regard to research? Is it for the European Parliament, say, a quick deal now which can be made so that the programs can get going? Or, I see you smile, please your reaction.
First of all, I think that the Commission set the priorities right. And I have to say, the President had been more ambitious than every member state. Because, it didn't come from the member state that they shift the priorities from spending program to investment program. And that had been, I think, that set the right tune. The problem we have is the setting of R&D, as we had been saying, and more concretely than in European terms, we stopped any ambition to deepen the European market in the early 2000s. We stopped with the exchange of goods. Services were not touched. That's specifically problematic because the service sector is very much the potential in terms of digitalization of our economies, where Europe still has a business case, in terms of infrastructure and so on. So I think the race is to some extent gone. But in terms of services, to take up these services, there's a lot of potential. But if you have a fragmented service market still, that is, so the contextualization of investments in research is more the problem than the research investments itself. Second challenge for us is, we have to get a little bit the terminology straight. We have a competitiveness program, which is somehow integrated or at least linked to the research program, but we didn't set straight what is competitiveness. You have different dreams, a little bit like in the Berlin bar, and it's a totally inappropriate example I'm saying, but if you see in a Berlin bar a blonde lady, it could be that she's neither blonde, could be that she's not even a lady. So in a way, in Europe, the perception, what is competitiveness is, we didn't set clear the terminology. Competitiveness is the competitiveness, the productivity of companies in global competition. Most of the examples are somehow somewhere between, let's say, French sovereignty ambitions and rightly placed ambition in terms of resilience. Even that between resilience and sovereignty, we didn't differentiate properly. So I think we have to set straight what we talk about, what is competitiveness. The second challenge we have in research, but in general terms, we have an incumbent market. So more or less, public funding goes to the incumbent. And I think it's interesting that this year's Nobel Prize specifically goes to an ERC grantee, specifically talking about innovation principles and specifically arguing, that creative destruction is not part of the innovation model in Europe. And that's also the question. If I see in recent time, yes, the automotive industry is the backbone of industrialization in Europe and so on. So, but is it the right way now to invest in cheap electric European-built cars, do the next joint automotive undertaking? So do we follow the incumbent economy logic, or do we risk to go to the constructive destruction? And I think that are the challenges. And then in principle terms, if you ask me, is that a smooth ride? No. Because we are going to write, that's for connoisseurs, we are going to write a second industry pillar. We don't leave it to a blurry kind of governance in the ECF. So that we will set straight. So in the end, there will be a framework program very much linked to other instruments, to the competitiveness question, but we have to have a second industry pillar.
But is there a red line for you? You say, listen, with regard to the budget, I will not accept any budget below this and this and that, or with regard to the content, are there some red lines for you?
Red lines, we really closely cooperate with the Commission, specifically with the President, I have to say, because she had been really brave.
Yeah.
And I think she get the headline straight. The question is how the apparatus had been actually digesting that so far. So I think we are united, but for us, what I see in the council, you had been reflecting to whether the pockets are open or not. I think for the first time, I would see, if I look to the Netherlands, to the frugal countries, I see there's an understanding that they might not touch the ambitions in terms of the R&D. Whether the ECF is going to fly to that extent, I think in agriculture, with the decision yesterday on the Mercosur, is really under threat, because that could be a Pyrrhus victory for the farmers.
Yeah.
But I think there is a growing understanding in the council that we need, that will be the ambition of this budget, and setting the priority rise. But the big thing behind the scenes is, to be honest, is the discussion between France and Germany, is to what extent France is willing to give up the internal protectionism in Europe, which is equivalent in tariffs to 44% due to OECD, and to what extent Germany is willing to give up the illusion of the Sparkassen world. So I mean, this fragmented capital market in Europe is not going to work. I mean, that doesn't mean that Germany necessarily wants to take every debt of every bank, every problematic bank in Europe, but obviously we need a common capital market, but also we need a deepening of the market. And then the last issue, I think in terms of technology, what is underestimated is the public sector itself. I mean, if we would invest, for example, much more the structural funds in the digitalization, AI use of public institution, we immediately would have more market.
Yeah.
And we sometimes underestimated that for technologies. I mean, we're looking to industry, we're looking to consumers, you're looking to the big monopolies here having their wonderful parlors here. But in real terms, it had been very often the public sector which had been taking up new technologies and had been setting the tune for the market. And I think there is the missing link. I would have expected, if we go to AI, we would have said, okay, the priority of the structural fund spending is that we invest 25% of the money of the digitalization of the public sector. Immediately we would have a market. And it's not a fragmented market, because that is really, and the public sector had been always the driver for innovation. We sometimes pick on that, and rightly so, but I mean, in terms of innovation, the public sector had been relatively good historically.
Marianne Mazzucato will love that statement. I come to Anne, and you're joining now the European Innovation Council, member of the board, a quite prestigious organization, a new kid on the block, because I mean, not you, but I mean the Innovation Council, looking after startup spin-offs, Pathfinder instruments. What are your ambitions now within this board with regard to a small company? Because through Breakthrough Energy, and you mentioned that already, the Bill Gates initiative, for which you were the vice president, you know a lot now about startups in the field of the energy sector. So what do you think or hope you can contribute now being a board member of the EIC?
So I already announced publicly what my ambition is. It's I want to basically dedicate the rest of my career to scaling companies in Europe. Because if we cannot scale companies in Europe, we're finished. We're literally finished. So this is what I want to do. And the EIC is wonderful, and it invests in early stage innovation, as I just said. It has amazing portfolio companies. But I want to focus more on the later stage. And this is already mentioned. There will be a new fund, the Scale Up Europe Fund, which will focus on growth funding. But let me say, this is not only a matter of funding. It really isn't. There are structural problems why companies in Europe can't scale. One was already mentioned. It's the lack of a coherent single market. De facto, companies have to scale in 27 different markets. So it takes a long time. It's super cumbersome. But there are also other areas, such as trade policy. We are a very open economy, so our companies really have to compete on an unlevel playing field. There's also state aid. I spoke about energy. So in the field of clean technologies, almost always you will need a subsidy of some kind in order to be able to get off the ground. We have a very strict state aid regime. Basically in Europe you can only give a subsidy when you can prove market failure. But how do you prove market failure when there's no market? So, this is where the Chinese are beating us hands down. They have really strategic priorities, and they are able to put subsidies. They would call it investments. These are investments. These are not subsidies into these areas. Always with a focus not just on innovation and science, where they are really, really strong players in China, but always on the commercialization. What are the companies that are going to lead? We have never done that. So we really need to completely redo how we do policy, how we think about the economy, understanding that companies today are very much an expression also of sovereign, of the power of sovereigns, right? Europe, unless we have the companies that go with it, and this is maybe my answer to your competitiveness challenge, and what is it? Competitiveness means companies can grow. Competitiveness means they penetrate global markets. That's what that means. It's turnover. Competitiveness means we can produce things that others can't. In ASML, for instance, the lithography machines, only we can make them in Europe. That's a big deal. But there aren't many areas anymore where we can make things that others can't. And so we really need to really dig into what are these underlying issues. And I want to cut across, because I think there's only one part of the Commission that really feels responsible for innovation. But this needs to become a cross-cutting priority for the entire institution.
And also with integrated policymaking.
Yes.
You can spend a lot of money on research for Big Pharma. If the Clinical Trials Directive is not favorable for Big Pharma, they will leave. And that is true for many things. Where Europe unites, we are unbeatable. Take Airbus. But if the competition rules prevent for creating these conglomerates, we are not going to work able to compete at global level. So you're fully right, and this integrated policy making is something, and that's the matter of the president.
And can I just add to that from my perspective in my previous job, where I worked with startups and a lot of investors, I think. And I take the point on the MFF, and I take the point on the EU budget. But don't forget the private sector investors. If you have a company that has an amazing innovation, chances are that's not just going to come out of EU funding, right? So we need to get the public-private partnership right, and we need to bring the private sector investors, startups, big corporations into everything that we are discussing here. Otherwise, this will not work.
Yeah. So your experience with public-private partnerships, you do a lot with universities as company. Can you say something about it? It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of finding each other, respecting respective roles. How is LinkedIn dealing with that?
Yeah, I think Anne is absolutely spot on that is the only way it works. That's the only way you're going to get the scale, the breadth, and the depth that is going to unleash this innovation that I think we all agree is there and latent. And the key thing is, how do we tap into it and unleash it? And I think in this area of skilling, which is obviously where we're very focused, that is very, very true. Right? It's not going to work with just private sector or just government acting on their own. What we need is to bring, given the scale of the transformation that we're facing, given the scale of change to jobs and skills across all sectors, across all economies, what we need is this real coming together of workers, private sector, and the public sector to figure out what is this AI skilling ecosystem that needs to be set up if we can make sure that we transform not just people coming through in education right now, but also workers who are already in their careers and even at an advanced stage of their careers. And there again, what I've seen over the last while with this new commission is that real focus and real energy around how do we get this set up. So a real openness to bringing in the universities, as you say, to bringing in the skill providers, to bringing in the companies and sitting down. And I think with governments, and I think one of the challenges that we have there is, again, it's not an area where the Commission specifically has competence, right? So again, you're talking about working with each of the member states and trying to figure out how is this going to work specifically for this individual member state? Where are the areas where we have this elevated baseline of talent, expertise, innovation, tradition, and then how do we go out and scale it? And I think a really important point to add to this in terms of the just ensuring that we get this broad-based productivity, this broad-based, which I think is what Christian is speaking to in terms of what do we mean by this competitiveness? How are we going to hardwire in these productivity gains? There, the SMBs are also just so important, which we haven't mentioned. Like, let's not forget, they're 99% of European companies. I think they employ almost 2/3 of European workers. And there we have real work to do, right? There again, when we look at the skills diffusion, interestingly, actually, what we see is it's the middle-sized firms who are the most adaptive and innovative in terms of getting this technology and getting their workers trained up. So the thinking there is that for larger enterprise, it's more cumbersome. They have more bigger teams to bring on board, more stakeholders, more compliance and infrastructure to figure out. And then for the smaller companies, they just don't have the resources. It's, it's harder to get the SMBs given resource challenges that they have. But where we see actual real innovation happening is that in that middle area, it's in the Mittelstand, for example, in Germany. And again, they are going to be the drivers. They're going to take these innovations, take these gains and percolate them through the broader economy. So we also need to make sure that it's not just the large enterprises, it's right the way through that we're bringing through this.
Absolutely. I turn to you, Maria, because we hear a lot of words about competitiveness, about innovation, commercialization, bringing things to the market. And a lot of people think that means, oh, we have to focus on applied research. You're heading one of the most prestigious initiatives of the European Commission, the ERC, European Innovation Council, Research Council, enormous success. Aren't you afraid that with all the talk about innovation, competitiveness, that everyone thinks, notably politicians, oh, that means applied research and that means that frontier research should be sacrificed?
Yes and no, depends on who you talk to. I mean, this focus on innovation should certainly not come at the detriment of frontier research. And indeed, some politicians struggle to understand this. Christian Ehler here is, of course, a shining exception, and we're so happy about his support. But the comforting myth that Europe is strong in science and weak in innovation, I think may, in some places, be driving bad policy choices. And this myth is actually very widespread. Even the description of our session here today begins by stating, and I'm quoting, Europe remains a global leader in scientific research, yet continues to struggle to translate excellence into innovation at scale. We've got to have a reality check here. Europe isn't just failing to commercialize great science, we're falling behind in producing it. We now generate only 18% of the top scientific papers, way behind the US and way behind China. We used to say China, yeah, they produce mass, but not quality. That is passé. They are leading. And the gap is particularly strong in the emerging fields and in the critical technologies. And this widespread misperception has led to some sort of, relaxed comfort and has led policymakers to focus on optimizing the industries while missing out on tomorrow's breakthroughs. Because productivity today, of course, comes from breakthrough technologies, AI, quantum, we are indeed, or were leading in some of these, and all of them begin in a research lab. Bottom-up, curiosity-driven frontier research creates the pool of knowledge from which innovation emerges. We often talk about a pipeline, so it's recognized that the fundamental research is needed. And in particularly, by the way, industry understands it. Industry recognizes that they can't do the high-risk research that publicly funded research is supposed to do. But we're talking about a pipeline. The thing about the pipeline is you put something in the front and something comes out at the end. And if it's not a terribly leaky pipeline, that's fairly efficient. But research and innovation isn't like that. Nobody knew when people were working on neural networks, these crazy nerds in their ivory towers, that would lead to ChatGPT and to everything we're seeing today. So it's not a pipeline that we need. It's not we're feeding something in that comes at the top. We need a huge pool where we don't even know whether anybody is going to, which part of it somebody is going to tap into. But we can be dead sure that somebody will be tapping into it. And if we don't fill that pool, if we only think about the pipeline, that will never happen. So that was a plea for fundamental curiosity-driven research. And we've really got to create the conditions for breakthrough science, not rest on our laurels about what we found out 5 or 10 years ago. That's feeding today's innovation, but creating the knowledge leapfrog. You know, if I talk to the AI experts that were funding at the ERC, they say, forget about catching up with large language models. Forget about it. We've lost that battle. Fund us to do the next big ideas so that we can leapfrog this. Yeah. That's what we've got to do. And science and curiosity-driven research are really the foundation for Europe's long-term strategy. And that's why when we see the member states not all running to pour the 2 trillion into the next EU budget, when that has to be reduced, we must protect Horizon Europe and we must protect fundamental science.
Absolutely. I think you'll make it crystal clear. Applause for that one. And having run a university in the Netherlands, in Eindhoven, the potential is there. There are so many brilliant young people. If you look at the power, the entrepreneurship, as Sue has mentioned, among young people is just amazing. We just should give them the room and unlock the potential. I turn to the audience to see if there's any questions you would like to ask to this. Oh, there's one over there. If you could introduce yourself and then say a few words.
Sure. My name is Martin Schilling. First, I'm co-founder and CEO of Deep Tech Momentum. We are a large deep tech innovation marketplace. First, I would like to thank the panel. It was really a good one. Thank you for your insights. My question is, I have hundreds of companies, of deep tech companies on our platform, and these companies need 2 things, money and customers. And I want to build what you said, Anne. This is an extremely important point. We need now to build this next 100 billion deep tech champions, and they need as well not only money, but customers. One solution could here be building trust, more trust along industry value chains where we integrate these new champions. So I want to ask the panel, what can we do together as well as Europe and the Commission to create more customer acquisition opportunities for these deep tech companies?
Yes, so this is the issue, is demand, basically. A lot of what European innovation and research policy has been very supply-driven, and we have forgotten about the demand. So there are a couple of issues here. Mr. Ehler already mentioned, if the public sector only bought what they said they would like to see, you know, it would be a really big difference. That I mean, honestly, was shocking for me when I was trying to scale clean tech in Europe. I'm like, why does the public sector that says that decarbonization is really, you know, the top priority, why don't they buy these things, you know? But can I tell you that my experience, one of the problems is, unless the policymaker and regulator knows where the technology frontier lies, they cannot buy it, because they don't even know it exists. So we need this curiosity, not just in science, but in the public sector as well, if I can say that, which has been very lethargic when it comes to all that. The second element is bigger corporations. So we really need to foster industry startup collaboration. I've been doing it for years. It's not easy, if I can say, because in Europe, the incumbents, they have never really been threatened by fast-growing startups, right, which has made them lazy. So we really need to foster this, including in the Commission. We have one commissioner who is in charge of startups and one who is responsible for industry. There's no cooperation in that area. So we really need to foster this because it's industry that is the offtake. It's industry that buys what deep tech produces. And that has never been really a priority in public policy. And I really think we need to go there. Yeah. Demand is the name of the game.
Perhaps, Christian, the question to you, because public procurement is often in a country, you know, 1/3 of the budget used for public procurement. Now, that was introduced at the time that you don't only have to go for the cheapest one, you can go for the most innovative. But that's not used in many countries. So there is an enormous potential for public procurement to boost innovation in Europe research, but it's not deployed. Why are governments hesitant in order to play the role, as Anne said, to be a buyer, a launching customer, or to indeed do public procurement based on innovation, capability and novelness instead of the cheapest, because the cheapest Europe always loses.
I mean, being an economist, and admittedly economists are not really scientists, but it's a delicate balance, because if public procurement drives prices, so I mean the problem for I was the author of the Net Zero Act, where we established for the first time almost mandatory public procurement percentage. But you have to be careful, because I mean, this is driving prices and inflation. So you have to really balance that, because if the public sector is interfering and you have this mandatory buy Europe, buy and so on. So I mean, that is not an easy creature. In the public sector, it's simply that public procurement hadn't been beefing up their capabilities for their abilities to do so. I mean, if you're in a municipality and you want to purchase something, I mean, how many experts you really have which have the knowledge of technology and so on. So this is a capacity building issue in the public sector we see. But what we are going to see right now is that we broaden the Net Zero Act to other sectors. So we want to use the public sector for more public procurement. But then the other aspect which is problematic is the precautionary principle. I mean, we are killing ourselves. I mean, and this is, I mean, we talk about the market, yet rightly so. We could have a deeper energy market, and which is going to come in 26 and 27. I'm sure that the Commission is coming up with proposals in that direction. I think that member states are much more flexible about that than they had been ever before since 2000. But I mean, the white elephant in the room is the precautionary principle. Because I mean, the public sector risking something on investment in new technologies and then being blamed for whatever consequences, I think that is a discussion we have to have. And we see that although already emerging, there's also good news that in member states, but also in the Commission, we need now these experimental clauses where we grant to the public sector much more flexibility in terms of that. But that is isolated instruments for the moment. I think we need a more general discussion about the precautionary principle in Europe, because from my point of view, we can fix politically the market. That's the matter of political will. But the precautionary principle is a broader societal discussion, and the Europeans are risk averse.
It comes a little bit to this point of integrated policy making. You have to make sure that all the policies are aligned to the same goal instead of that they're hampering each other.
But if I may, because you have said we can't do multi-language model, I just, STOA had been suggesting, and we're going to do that this year, that we do an online translation of all public media publications, so evening news, in all languages at the same time for all Europeans. That will build up the biggest multi-language model in the world in terms of European languages. So you can easily see that even touching the dimension of multi-language model, where we said that is just industry, the big ones, and so on. So no. We're going to do. I mean, this is in 26, 27. We are now in intense discussion with the DG Connect that we invest up to 300 billion euros on €1 million on the multi-language model and a machine to translate every public available news in Europe online for every European citizen in every language. And I think that shows if the public sector is exemplifying itself in terms of ambitious technologies, you know, we can go big.
I have been informed by George that there is news with regards to the Draghi report, the implementation of the Draghi report. So if there's news, we always make room for news. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Robert Jan. So first,
Explain a little bit who you are, what you've done, and what is the news you're going to bring
Okay,
us.
I'll tell you about the what and the who first. Thanks to George, Camilla, and Henry for doing this fantastic thing. Cannot help thinking that Greenland is just in the middle. So it's interesting logo you chose. So the news is that, I mean, we see that the US competitiveness and growth is coming mainly today from digital AI. We think that the Draghi report is the report that everybody loves to talk about, loves to celebrate. As most of you said, there's not a lot of action happening. So what can we do, and how can we empower those who want to be powers of change? So, and I remind, it was commissioned September 23. We are January 26. Not a lot has happened. So what did we do?
And who's we? Who's we?
Okay, so who is we? We is what Christian Ehler just mentioned, is that even in the innovation and research side, there are incumbents, and we are the Joint European Disruptive Initiative. So we basically build something in the middle of ERC and EIC. We do mission-driven technology programs. The model is DARPA. Everybody is talking about DARPA. Draghi is talking about DARPA. Heitor is talking about DARPA. And we're basically a prototype coming from the civil society, funded by some member states, funded by philanthropy. Some people talked about private sector. I think it's beyond the companies. And we fund advanced research. We've existing since 2 years, and already 7,000 scientists and top technology leaders are running. So we have a program on alternatives to critical materials, to fusion, first wall material. I mean, all those things where we will build the competitiveness of tomorrow. That is we. And the we is also 15 top CEOs from Europe. We'll publish the list soon. And what we've decided to do, and we announced it today, is we will publish every quarter what we call the Draghi Tracker. You can see it in draghitracker.org, where we basically took the 20 main measures of Draghi, because Draghi had 383 measures. Most of them are linked with innovation, and every quarter we will have a factual check. Where do we stand? Do we talk about it and nothing happening? Is it in the process of happening? You talked about clinical trials. Not a lot of things have happened on that. The patent regime, EU Inc., the 28 regime, things like that. More money on fundamental blue sky research. And the idea is that every quarter we will empower those at the Commission, but more generally, that want to have a real change. And I think the risk, of course, of us in Europe is that we talk about Draghi, that we cannot be able to have very clear points where we can empower those who want to have a real change. So watch for that. So three calls for action for all of you. draghitracker.org. Look at it. 20 measures, not 383. A very factual approach to it. Second thing, we will publish a list, the list of the 15 CEOs who are supporting us. Many more are joining us. And third, that is more a call for action for, that's probably also what the CAP represents. I think we need to be a little bit bolder. When you, Mr. Ehler, you say the research environment is an incumbent one, I think we should also think about our instruments. The instruments cannot be they cannot be one size fits all, which is a bit the risk I see with this, So we think philanthropy, we think foundations have a major role to play. They will not replace public funding, but they can do probably things that we don't dare to do. That's point number one. Point number two, let's be a little bit bold in timing. It's not a question of money. Of course, more money is better. Your budgets need to be increased, but the speed is today. And I think Trump is showing us today. Speed and setting the agenda that is what help us define the future. Otherwise, we are always going to react. It's interesting to see how ChatGPT you mentioned, we reacted to that. DeepSeek, that should have been a European project, reducing by 2 orders of magnitude the energy consumption of inference. And as you said, it's an opportunity to reshuffle the cards. So draghitracker.org, we are supporting you. And again, wonderful initiative with the Science House.
Give him a big hand of applause. We are coming gradually to the end of our session. I would just like to end on a positive note, because I mentioned that at the university I've been running, I saw the enormous potential. Brilliant young people, entrepreneurial, unbelievable cooperation, notably in Eindhoven with companies like ASML, with Philips Electronics, NXP. So there's an enormous potential. And for you, Maria, and I'm going to ask the question to all of you, the glass is half full or half empty for Europe? Are you an optimist?
I'm an optimist, though it's sometimes hard. So half full. And actually, with regard to funding, it's pretty full if we can keep that number.
Christian.
I'm grateful for the American disaster because it shows that this principal idea that the public sector for the public good is solidly financing institution, that we are not completely driven, which is very problematic, just by the potential economic outcome, that we have a solid base to feed the funnel, as you have been rightly saying, and that we can prove also that what we never thought, we thought that the second pillar would be the funnel for the EIC. What we see where we are super successful is the link between the ERC and the EIC. We wouldn't have thought when we designed the EIC. So I'm optimistic that Europe needs the kick in the ass by what happens in the United States. And I think that is going to change things.
And make sure that in the future you're not going to be introduced as the 400 billion man, but the 200 billion man. So fight for the budget, Christian. And optimistic?
Somewhat. I do think there is an element of opportunity here that the US is basically imploding. I don't think this. I think this will end in tears. I don't think this can work. And where Europe, sort of with its focus on evidence, on reason, discovery, and really being sort of a more rational actor in this insane global environment, can be a competitive advantage, but only if we fix the basics, the single market, a capital markets union. All of these things are now imperative. By the way, not just for economic reasons, but security reasons. Because we learned the hard way that with economic decline, we become very vulnerable and exposed and dependent on others we don't want to be dependent on. So we need to become much smarter and link these issues really to our own sovereignty and the survival of the European model. But if we do that, the sky is the limit.
Thank you. Sue?
Yeah,
You look like an optimist.
Look, I think there are real challenges out there. I think they've been well rehearsed here this morning. But yes, half full. I think you're really seeing, you see it in this room today, just this real energy and passion of like, we got to get going here. We got to move. We need to get growth and innovation and productivity into this market to continue with this European project and this European model. Some of the fundamentals on the talent side are really strong. The skills are really strong. And I think ultimately, just as you said, Robert Jan, the thing that gives me most optimism, when you look at those young people coming through, not only is there just enormous talent and potential, but they, in a different way, because I think one of the things that's been spoken about is that a risk aversion. What we see coming through is that real entrepreneurial, we see this in the data. These young kids are going out and if they don't find what they want, they're starting up their own business. And beyond that entrepreneurial spirit, this real values-based and purpose-driven work and contribution. So historically, to give you a sense, if you'd have asked most people, what are the three things you're looking for in a job? Most people would have said the same three things to you. Salary, title, velocity to promotion. You go and ask these young kids, of course those things are important, but they will tell you, I want meaning in my life, I want to make a contribution, fighting climate being a key one, social issues being another, I want work-life balance, I want a different kind of career, I want to make a different kind of contribution, and that, if we can tap into that, appetite is there, the raw talent is there, the potential is there, if we can tap into that, we are well on our way.
Thank you very much, and a big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much.